This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
Way out there beyond this hick town, Barnaby. There's a slick town, Barnaby, out there.
Place to Be Nation, welcome back to another edition of the movie review of the day here on the Pop Experience. I am Steve Riddle, back again for another go-around. Today, we are kicking off our second theme week this week, where we're going to be looking at films from one of the premier animation studios of all time, that being, of course, Pixar. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, why are we doing this week and not the first week of March, which is when the newest Pixar film, Hoppers, comes out. That, of course, comes out officially on March 6th, but you're probably wondering why we're not doing this theme week for that week. Well, we did kind of do a little of a shuffling around, because we wanted to, because I'll kind of take responsibility for that, because I mentioned about how we should do we should probably do a theme week around the Academy Awards. So that's what we're going to do for a future theme week, just spoilers. So we decided to move our Pixar week up to this week, and but obviously we know we were going to do it here, and I am going to, like I said, kick it off this week with arguably one of not just Pixar's greatest films, but one of the greatest films made in the last, probably the last 20 or so years. It's one of my all-time favorite films, and it's one that I think still holds up almost 20 years later when it came out, and that is, of course, the film known as WALL-E. This, of course, was released on June 27th, 2008. Budget of $180 million, box office $532.5 million. It stars Ben Burtt, Elissa Knight, Jeff Garlin, John Ratzenberger, Sigourney Weaver, and Fred Willard in a live-action appearance. It, of course, follows a robot named WALL-E who is busy, who is cleaning up the Earth after it's been abandoned due to to overflow of garbage. Along the way, he meets a robot named Eve, who ends up, with WALL-E's help, finding a plant that takes them to then their main ship, the Axiom. And along the way, we see them fall in love, and we see the plight of them trying to return the Axiom to Earth and bring humanity back to Earth. So normally, if you've been following me, normally I usually do my 3 things that worked and 3 things that didn't work, but I'll be perfectly honest, there wasn't much of this film that didn't work, so I'm actually going to update it a little bit here when I do come across films like that, and instead do the 6 things that worked. I will talk about something that maybe could have counted as something that didn't work, but that's more of a personal preference, but we'll get there down the line, so down here in a minute. So, so for the 6 things that didn't work, number 1, I really like how pretty much the first 40 minutes of this film, we don't meet a single human. The only time we do see like any human or whatever is when we see those like holographic screens kind of advertising going into space for like long space journeys. And then, we do see like the brief shot of the Axiom, but pretty much for the first 40 minutes, we see WALL-E basically cleaning up, and he's the only active robot still on Earth, cleaning up and then collecting like these little trinkets as he's developing his little personality. Which, again, considering we don't get any dialogue, aside from like little mechanical sounds, and when Eve does arrive, which is 20 minutes into the film, they interact a little briefly, but pretty much the whole first 20 minutes, we just see WALL-E going about, cleaning up, collecting these little trinkets. But he's got such a great personality to him that you're not bored throughout this whole thing, because that's one thing that really could have hindered it originally. It's like if you're just like, come on, let's if you're watching this and you're just like, well, come on, let's get to some big stuff here. But they did a really good job in making WALL-E so personable and so lovable that's like you want to follow him, collect all this different stuff. And then when we get to when Eve arrives, and kind of see their relationship grow, which actually I'll just take it to my second point here, the relationship between Wally and Eve, how it starts, with Eve's kind of, indifferent to him. Then he kind of shows her like his little collections, and then eventually when he shows her the plant, and she goes into like safe mode in essence, we see him take care of her, and then they eventually make it up to the Axiom, where again the relationships, Eve's at first is so conditioned to fulfill her objective, or her directive I should say, and we see that eventually break down to the point where she sees like the highlights of when she was in safe mode, and she sees what Wally's done for her to protect her all that time, and how she's like so, and how like kind of melts her heart in essence, in quotes, because obviously she's a robot, to the point that she's ready to just throw away her directive just to be with Wally, but he realizes they need to save Earth and everything. So just seeing that relationship grow is just so really beautifully well done. And again, it's like these are two robots who find, who display love and emotion for each other, which is, something that you don't see a lot in these films. Number 3, I love the score of this film. It is so beautifully done, particularly like in the beginning where we see Eve arrive and she's just flying around and you just hear the music. So well done. And then we hear it again later when they're when they're dancing in space, kind of that same thing. And this is one of the few times, because I usually don't buy film soundtracks on CD or like just in like for iTunes, and this was one of the few films I did just because I really loved it so much. And I do want to give a quick shout out to the we do get a couple of songs in there. We get La Vie en Rose, which I think is really well done, and then we got We're Coming Down by Peter Gabriel, which is played during the credits, which I think is a really good song. But the score itself is really beautiful, and I'll kind of get to that and just kind of get further in that in just a minute. Number 4, I love the space scenes, like when the ship arrives to pick up Eve, and then it returns to the Axiom, and we just see Wally kind of just marveling at everything. Just again really well done. And I know that the team at Pixar was inspired to do Wall-E after how well Finding Nemo turned out, and how like the underwater scenes of that film turned out. They felt they could then translate it to doing a space film, and again, it just really plays out really well, particularly in the scene where Wall-E barely escapes the pod before it explodes, and he's just flying there with a fire extinguisher, and he does this little like dancing scenes there with Eve. Again, one of my favorite parts is where when Wally shows he has the plant, and Eve like embraces him and then gives him like a little kiss, like the little bit of electricity, and Wally's just like free flying in his face, like he's like just, it's so in love. It's really cute, and again, just really well done, those scenes in space where they're flying around and everything. I thought it was really, really well done. Number 5, seeing how turned upside down, like everyone that meets Wall-E on the Axiom ends up being like all the robots that are malfunctioning, that eventually kind of go haywire. Then they kind of are brought together, because one of the really well done things as well about this film is how Wall-E becomes so enthralled with the 2 scenes from Hello Dolly, which is put on your Sunday clothes, and then the very end where it's like it only takes a moment, but how like they use the put on your Sunday clothes to like bring all the malfunctioning robots together to help Wall-E and Eve get the plant to where it needs to be. I thought was again really well done, and just seeing like these humans who are just so used to just being lazy, and how they become so accustomed to their comfort. And then we see like the 2, particularly John and Mary, who are I guess kind of awakened out of that trance, so to speak, thanks to Wall-E. And then eventually, like when they do return to Earth, and the humans kind of realize that they got to get out of their comfort zone and work to make Earth a better place. I thought again is really well done, and we see again the robots kind of do the same thing. And 6, Otto is a very interesting villain in that he's not so much evil per se. He's more just he was like Eve for a while. He has a directive, that of course being E113, which for those that know is that little inside joke. You see that with all the Pixar films, but he's a directive to not return the Axiom to Earth no matter what, even though because he believes that that Earth is uninhabitable, even though we have now this plant that has somehow managed to grow. And seeing the captain, again, kind of be brought out of his little, like comfort, learning about Earth, eventually discovering, coming to the point that they need to return, and then, having that little like final fight there with Otto, where he turns him off autopilot in essence and takes control himself, I thought was really, really well done. And again, Otto is not so much evil; he's just committed to his. He's a robot that has a directive, and he's going to see to it. And then there's one more, and then one more, actually 7, because again, there's so many great things about the film, but just that final bit there where Wally in essence sacrifices himself to keep the little thing open so that they can put the plant in it and then direct them back to Earth, and then Eve uses the spare parts he had to fix them. But then that little moment there where Wally kind of suffers from amnesia, in essence, he doesn't remember anything, and until the very end where Eve finally kind of triggers his memory by giving him that last kiss while also singing "It Only Took a Moment," humming "It Only Took a Moment." Again, just incredibly well done. I could name like a bunch of things from this movie that work, because it's just so. It's so incredible, and it's Pixar has done so many great films over the years. It's really hard to rank them. Maybe that's one thing we'll do down the line. But I know we did a Making Mount Rushmore of Pixar films, and I know I made a Mount Rushmore. This was on it for me at least, so I had to go back and see who else was on, and what else made that list. But I did want to just call it really quick, and I know I said that there was nothing here that didn't work, but I do want to just briefly mention. So, obviously, this film won Best Animated Picture at the Academy Awards, which it deserved. However, it was nominated for a couple of other. It was nominated also for original screenplay, original score, original song, sound editing, and sound mixing. Now, you can make an argument that it probably has a legit shot to win all of those, particularly for me at least, best score, because again, I love the score for the film, and also best original screenplay. I think it could have won that. I have the nominees pulled here. So, original screenplay ended up going to Milk, which, I mean, I haven't seen that film. Maybe that'll be one I cover later, but maybe not, but we'll see. And then original score went to Slumdog Millionaire, which again, probably could have given it to Wally. And then sound editing went to Dark Knight, which I'll concede to that one. And then sound mixing went to Slumdog Millionaire, which again maybe could have gone to Wally. But this was a year where Wally could easily have been nominated for Best Picture. The nominees that year were Slumdog Millionaire, which won, Curious Case of Benjamin Button, Frost Nixon, Milk, and The Reader. Now, I know we're a year away from the Best Picture nominees being expanded to 10, and I know a lot of people think that it was because The Dark Knight didn't get nominated for Best Picture, that's why they expanded it, which is probably true. But I would argue that if any animated film deserved to be nominated for Best Picture, it was WALL-E. I know that Up did a year later, and then Toy Story 3 did after that, which, again, both amazing films deserve to get that nod. But WALL-E, I think, could have easily replaced like Frost Nixon or The Reader, or, again, no knock on those films, but, this was about as perfect of a film as you could get, and it deserved to get a Best Picture nod, in my opinion. So I know that's up for debate, but that's just my opinion. Excuse me. Now for my awards, of course, my MVP of the film, I think, definitely has to be Ben Burtt, who voices WALL-E. Again, considering it's just all robot sounds and just all this stuff, I think he again brings a lot of personality to WALL-E, and and makes him relatable to you on a human to robot level. He also voices Mo, which is a cute the fun character that always tries to clean up after Wall-E, which I think is fun. And Wall-E's also my favorite character. He's just, again, so much personality, so much, just, he's so lovable. You really are rooting for him to get to fall in love with Eve, and eventually at the end when he sacrifices himself to so Eve can get the plant in the little like tracker there so they can then go back to Earth, I think is really just beautifully done. There wasn't really a character I didn't like. Yeah, like I can't really. I mean, they're all good characters. The captain is really, he's kind of there for like comedic effect at first before he eventually gets serious at the end there. I like, I know they didn't put a lot of emphasis on the humans, but I'm glad they at least had two humans, John and Mary, that can kind of follow along. I guess I'm not a big fan. I wasn't that big of a fan of Gopher. Like, I know what he was the stoolie in essence for Otto. He meets a very bad end because he gets, during the fight with Otto and the captain, he gets kicked out of the captain's, nest there. And you think he's going to land in the pool, but he ends up landing right next to it and just gets destroyed. So, but yeah, that's probably when I go. Favorite scene, again, so many fantastic scenes. It's hard to pick one, but I think I gotta go with after Wall-E escapes the pod, and he and Eve do their little like space dance while the music's playing. Is just, again, very beautifully done. Again, there's a number of scenes you can go that can go in this category. Could win this, but that's definitely the one I would definitely pick. And final grade, I mean, I've spent almost 17 minutes talking about how great it is. It's an easy 10 out of 10. It's probably Pixar's best film. Again, that's up for debate. So many great films, which we're going to cover this week, but I think I started off strong here by picking in my opinion, their greatest film. So again, easy 10 out of 10 for me. Highly recommended if you've never seen it before, which I don't know why if you haven't, but you definitely should. Especially if you are a fan of Pixar. I think you can just see them at they're in a really good run here, because like you got this film, and then you got Up the next year, and then Toy Story 3. That's 3 straight bangers of films right there. So I know, Up will probably be touched on this week, and I know later in the year, just spoiler, we do have a Toy Story theme week coming up because we got Toy Story 5 coming out in the summer. So we'll touch on those films down the line, but yeah, just again, if you've never seen Wall-E before, please go do so. If you haven't seen it in a while, throw it on. It's a really quick watch, doesn't drag, and it's just, again, just one of the most perfect films I think you'll ever find. So with that, that's going to do it for me for today. I will be back later in the week to cover another Pixar film. I'm not going to spoil it, so you'll have to wait and see when that pod comes out what it is. So, but with that, thank you again for listening. Continue to follow us along as we're building up this pod here. Of course, we have our other daily pod, the Video Jukebox Song of the Day. That's mainly myself and Andy. We're closing in on 1,000 episodes for that one. So we're hitting a big milestone with that one just as we're getting this one off the ground, which I think is really cool. So, and also follow us on all of our other feeds as well. A lot of great stuff going on as we are now, of course, for you wrestling fans, we're on the road to WrestleMania here in Las Vegas. So, keep following along with that. Keep supporting us with that. So with that, I am Steve Riddle. This has been the movie review of the day here on the Pop Experience, and we'll see you next time.
By changing the script and the scene, despite all you made of it, you were always afraid of a change. You got a lot on your chest. Well, you can come as my guest.